This conference will now be recorded.
Oh, yeah, just let me know if you're unable to see my screen.
Yeah, it's looking somewhat small screen. Bhaiya,
Um,
can you please enlarge?
Now, is it fine now? So now I'm in a full screen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks good right now.
Okay.
And you have a something full screen option in the meeting controls. You can enable that.
Yeah, I think just tell them, Rajendra, I think they need to hide the all participants.
One second, can anyone share your screen so that, I mean, who are unable to stop the share?
We have joined by mobile, Rajendra, me and Bhavya and Anirudh. So we couldn't
Okay, okay. Maybe even mobile, it looks the same, I think. Mm,
to
so
share screen. We need
yeah,
present.
while doing the comments, I will enlarge the screen. Okay. Today I'll just brief about the remaining parts of Linux, the architecture, and what is a kernel, and followed by some hands-on commands. So as discussed earlier in a previous session, so Linux operating system has its own architecture. If you see any operating system, either IoT or mobile or uh, the regular operating system, so it has a softwares installed by default or a custom user installed softwares to interact or to fulfill our necessity, and it has a user process. Whatever the softwares which we have installed, it has their own process, right? Whenever we are accessing the same service, it will be running background inside our operating system, and the utilities, the libraries or something, whatever needed for the user installed softwares or system installed softwares. And these compilers are very common on any operating system, or not the same versions, but for Windows we will be having a different compilers, and for Linux based operating systems we will be having a different compilers. One second. The system libraries, whenever we all these system softwares or user process and utilities, if at all it has to communicate, it has to do with through the system libraries. So, and the system libraries will communicate to the kernel, and through the kernel module, it will communicate to the hardware. So, what exactly need of here communicating to the hardware? So, whenever any request, let's say an example, sorry. So I'm looking for VirtualBox in my local. Now, if you see, the box has come down because I have searched through my search box. So just my spotlight has displayed me a result, and now I have entered. So, and my particular process, the spotlight process is looking for the virtual box, and it is able to get the result. It is possible only because of the software and hardware combination of our operating system plus our my local resources. It exactly speaks about that. So when we are searching for something which is already installed in a machine, or when we are accessing Google Chrome or any application, if typically talk about Linux operating system, if you have installed our Tomcat or a Docker or a Ansible, what are the softwares we need it for maintaining and for deploying our target environments and deploying our application into those target environments. So for those things, we should know that how it is getting communicated inside to the hardware. So and once we request for something, it will take the process. It will process will take a particular task. Then from the task, it will just communicate to the hardware. So what exactly here hardware? You can imagine that it will be a processor, it will be a RAM. So those are physical devices in our hardware which were installed. And when we connect any our IO devices like a mouse or a charger, we used to get a notification over there. How system used to detect them. So IO read and write operations when we are doing. And if you want to extend our existing storage, like we used to mount our storages. If you remember, um, Bharat has given a session about AWS EC2 installation, sorry, launching machine. Maybe I'm not sure about whether he has given about the storages since that was the initial introductory session. So even for EC2 machine, this is that is same like our regular machine, our local machine, but it is a different flavor. So when we are dealing with that, and since it is on a cloud, and we need to connect it to any IO devices, like some projects will be depending on GPUs, typically multimedia products or IoT products or any sort of AML products. They deal with GPUs. So they need some graphical user interface to work their products. So those will be handled in Amazon warehouse itself, Amazon availability zones itself with the IO devices. So whatever the graphics unit or graphics amount of a graphics size or a graphic card size we want, they will provide us just by assigning or just by mounting to our existing EC2 instance, or whenever we are opting for that particular model, we need to go for the dedicated AMIs. So Amazon machine images while launching our EC2 machine. So those are something about IO devices and adding additional storages. So this is how any operating system works, not only a Linux or any operating system, either so our digital gadgets are running. So in the same way, it will interact with our hardware. Sorry, I'm just looking out for what is the version of kernel. So right now I have I have a 21.3 uh, as on Jan 5th. And every time whenever we have got a new kernels, uh, you might have listened about frequent words, the patching on environments is going on. So the patching is mostly nothing but application packages, at upgrading or downgrading the application packages along with system packages as well. System packages consist of security patches and kernel upgrades. Kernel upgrades are a major activity basically than comparing with a regular application patching and this operating system security patches. So it will take a more time since it is a system level. So it will affect everywhere in the application server. So that's about OS operating any Linux operating system or Windows operating system, any other flavors which we have. So now coming to kernel. So what is a kernel? So it's a major part of our operating system. It is a software, not a hardware. So it establishes the communication between the hardware which we have and with the software. So whenever I've searched for something, it is in a software request which is going to getting processed by the processor. That means it is communicating to the hardware. Hey, I'm looking for the virtual machine, Oracle Virtual Box, and I need the result. So and just now it is come up. It means it has occupied some RAM since it is up and running, and it is utilizing some hardware storage like my SSD storage it is utilizing, and some networking capabilities it is using. And whenever I play any song inside this virtual machine, I used to get a sounds out of it. So everything will be interacting with the hardware. I'm operating through software and I'm getting a result through the hardware. So coming to the kernel architecture, whatever I have explained, if you see, typically it talks about that any application request or any user has logged in and he's doing some he's utilizing any other applications, whether the custom installed applications or default system installed applications, whether he's working on them, and the different types of compilers we have. And another user is looking out for an logs, and another is looking out for an a date and other commands. So since it is a multi-user, so multiple users are working through the terminal and it will be processed via shell. So terminal in the sense shell, whether we'll discuss about this shell in next slide. So basically through the shell, it will communicate to the kernel. So kernel, what it will do, whatever the request, either for a compiler or date or a SCD command, I have used the cat command. So with it will take an input of the cat command and it will give it to the hardware by processing it or compiling and interpreting it. So it will be directly processed from the hardware and it will give back the result through shell, and we can see that. So every command or everything whatever we are typing here, it is getting a response from our hardware. Anything, not only on a command line, in any operating system, whatever action which we are doing, it will be getting processed by the hardware via kernel. And on our next slide, we'll just discuss about how we can operate and communicate with the Linux machines. So operating is nothing but let's say for a communication. For a communication, we have a SSH. That means now it is my local machine. I'm able to communicate to you, and I'm able to share my meeting invites, and I'm able to share the knowledge whatever I have. So for any action which I want to do in my companies or organization environments, like a developer environment and a QA environment or a pre-prod UAT. So those environments, if I need to connect, I should have an medium to communicate or connect to those machines. Since all of them are mostly Linux based operating systems. So I used to connect with the SSH. What exactly SSH? It is a secure shell and it will be running on port 2022. One second. SSH will be running on port 2022. So some of you are not aware of the ports, and will be discussing about them in detail when we are dealing with AWS. How we can enable inbound and outbound rules, and what ports are to be enabled. What is the need of that? So to communicate to any operating system, any of the server, we should need a medium. Through SSH client, I'm going to connect to the target servers in AWS. That means it it will be some SSH client. Here I'm running somewhere, the server should be there, and that should be listening to my request. So that is a port where they have enabled, and the server is running on a port 2022. My SSH server is running on my EC2 machine. So I'm connecting to this particular port number with SSH client. In general, for your day-to-day task or troubleshooting and logging to the machine, this is the only way people used to connect, through SSH. And let me just spin out an EC2 instance. Someone has already missed. I have nothing as of now. Hope everyone has created your AWS free account. So keep handy of the account. Maybe by end of this week, we might start this AWS, or in the weekend. So while launching AWS EC2 machine, EC2 compute engine, so this is the first step. We need to choose
Rajendra,
an
what
AM.
is EC2 here?
Okay. What is the EC2 machine you're asking about, right?
Yes.
So um, typically EC2 machine is a virtual machine, like we have discussed in the last session. It is in a compute engine. Basically, earlier systems or companies used to rely on a on-premise environment, like I've shown in one second.
Yeah, I have remembered those things, but I'm not sure about EC2. EC2 is something
Yes,
like already available virtual machines that will be used by customers, right? That is the thing you are going to say.
exactly. So it is not available up and running, but it is on demand whenever we need it. Now let me open my EC2 dashboard. I have nothing in my dashboard. There is no virtual machine or EC2 instance. We can call this as a virtual machine also. It is running
Okay.
on the cloud. Since it is not our hardware, we are not a managing. Basically, we are not a managing in the sense we don't have a hardware for this particular virtual machine. And this particular EC2 instance, there is no, in my Mumbai availability zone, there is no EC2 instance which is running right now. And I'm launching the new EC2 instance. Like I said, EC2 instance is nothing but an operating system which is running inside Amazon cloud. So this is Ubuntu Server 2004, and the versions, whatever the versions we wanted to install. Imagine you have given a task to set up a Jenkins server or to set up any build server or any build node in a cloud. So the first thing we need to know what kind of a server we are going to host. So these things will be given by the architects or something. Some situations we need to decide based on a load, and when we used to interact with the QA and the development teams, and what will be our build timings and the number of builds and the frequency of a commits in a git. Those things will be discussed about a git and the commits and all those stuff. And whenever we are deciding what kind of a virtual EC2 machine we need it, that will be based on a requirement. In this situation, let's say I'm just utilizing this EC2 compute engine only for doing SSH purpose or something to just to describe some basic Linux commands. I'm going with a free tier now, and there will be another Ubuntu Server 2004 with SQL Server 2019 standard. If at all, now let's say our application is running on SQL Server 2019 database. My front end or controllers are communicating to this SQL Server 2019. In this situation, I may prefer this, and based on 1 second. Now you can see deep learning, dedicated AMIs with the different versions, AML. And if you see, just before I was talking about and graphic cards, NVIDIA and other GPU drivers. These things and all vary from our requirement, and mostly companies used to maintain their own AMIs with the help of either Packer or any custom tools to build immutable image. And there is another there are many places to get the AWS marketplace and the community AMIs. Those are freely available. So now I'm going with a quick start. Like I have shown yesterday, instead of running a virtual machine in my local, so it will utilize my 1 GB of RAM. If you see the configuration, video memory is a 16 MB and the base memory is a 1500. Base memory is a RAM size 1500 MB, 1.5 gigs of RAM it is utilizing from my local machine. And when I'm dealing with multiple applications, I may be ended up having somewhere stuck in my regular process. These things you might have encountered many times with your mobile or with your laptop, and after 6 months or 1 year, our resources getting utilized and our mobile or laptop is getting very slow. So that's where we used to clean up our machine, and instead of encountering all those stuff, I'm just relying on a cloud. So I don't want to spin up my virtual machine in a local. Or let's say imagine I'm running an organization. To just host my organization's website and like all company information, careers, client information about my company, uh, we have a multi-page web application. And the multi-page web application, instead of hosting in my hardware, if I at all I need to host the website of my company, I need to maintain a hardware servers. So I need to maintain a hardware machines, and on top of that I need to install hypervisors, and I need to install a virtual machines. Virtual machine is nothing but a compute engine on any environment like on a AWS, we are calling them as a EC2 instance. On a local, whenever I'm spinning up a new VM, new virtual machine, I'm calling them as a new virtual machine on a virtual box, Oracle virtual box. If somebody using VMware workstation, they will be calling that as a virtual machine. So based on my need, I'm just spinning new machine for my regular computing task necessity. In the same way, I'm launching EC2 Compute Engine. Now I'm going with a Ubuntu 20.04 with 64-bit x86 or ARM. These are ARM, the processor specific, and those
So,
can be ignored. Yep.
so instead of Red Hat, um, we are using Ubuntu, or correct
Yeah,
me
I'm
if I'm.
launching Ubuntu.
So you're not going to be use Red Hat, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So maybe in a further sessions we might use, but currently, right now I'm just launching Ubuntu for an example to show you how to connect to the computer EC2 machine from your local machine when
Uh,
everything. Yep.
sorry, Rajendra. I mean, the thing is, on Saturday's class, Bharat explained about Red
Mm-hmm.
Hat, installing Red Hat on EC2. So that's why I a bit confused and
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Like I said, our operating system, irrespective of RHEL, Red Hat, or
Mhm,
Ubuntu,
mhm.
mostly 90% of the commands are same.
Yes,
80
yes.
to 90% of the commands. And since we are not installing any software, or I mean we are not installing either Red Hat or Ubuntu, I'm just launching machine. I'm not installing any software there. So
Okay.
just to show you how to launch a machine, those things, I'm just launching a sample Ubuntu machine. Even I can launch Red Hat machine, but for a
Yes,
time
yes.
being, see, trying a different flavors, it will be just handy for us. You get to know, okay, we can
Yeah,
launch
gotcha.
multiple flavors of okay, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
And you can see we have selected the hardware configuration while launching. By default, whenever we select T2 micro or a T2 nano or a small other kind of EC2 compute engine, it will just display the default configuration. If you want to change the configuration, uh, for this purpose, we need to opt for types of compute engines. We cannot change our existing. Let's say T2 micro. This is always having 1 gigs of memory, EBS volume around 10 gigs, and 2.5 gigs of processor, and one virtual CPU. These are hardware requirements. One virtual CPU and 2.5 gigs of processing, and 1 gigs of RAM, the EBS. So these are my hardware specifications whenever I'm purchasing a new laptop to my office purpose to host my application. So I need to go and purchase out there in a market to host my web application. Instead, I'm just launching the same configuration of a machine in cloud. Amazon, behind the Amazon cloud, even they maintain the physical locations. They have a huge number of availability zones. Even Hyderabad, we have a one. So let me just open that. let me just open out Asia Pacific. And you can see the yellow mark is the regions and blue is the edge locations. And one region we might be having multiple availability zones.
You mean to say those are the data centers which support this virtual machine?
Exactly. So are the data centers, they name it as a availability zones and regions. So one region, let me just open it out. This is a regions and availability zones. AP South, we have a one. AP Southeast, 3, Jakarta. And in AP South in India, we have a Mumbai. So this is a region, basically. In Mumbai region, we will be having a multiple availability zones. For instance, we have a Amazon data center in Hyderabad, I think. So that will be considered as a availability zone. In one region, we might be having a multiple availability zones to mitigate the failover cases. Let's say something happened in a Mumbai data center and the data, our website should not go down, and they maintain always the replication between near availability zones. This will be explained in brief by Bharat. So now this case, I'm launching a T2 micro and in Mumbai zone, AP South 1. My machine is getting created in Mumbai data center. It will utilize their hardware and it will create a virtual machine for us. And I can host my web application. I can host my company's website in this particular compute engine. And now I'm proceeding with the review and launch. Anytime if you want to increase, hey, since the initial days of a website launch, we know we have a small traffic or sometimes we don't even get a traffic to our websites based on kind of a website which we are launching. And after some days, we might be getting a full traffic into our web application if it is any sort of a e-commerce based application where the month on month or year on year traffic will be gradually getting increased. So for that, we will be depending on different kinds, not a T2 micro. That EC2 types will be explained later. So based on load, we used to load our requirements. We used to get new virtual machines and we used to install our application softwares over there, and we have to deploy our application servers and our application as well. And now if you see security groups, that is about instance type and AMI. So I'm launching my machine with Ubuntu Server 2004. We can launch the same machine T2 Micro with other server like a Red Hat. I can launch my EC2 machine with a Windows based operating system. Now recently Amazon has announced a Mac operating system as well for cloud computing. So you don't need to have any MacBook or iMac if you want to use or if you want to experience or if you want to deploy your application. Let's say some situations, some applications only supports Mac or iMac. So the Mac servers, basically we need to purchase the Mac hardware or iMac from the Apple, and we need to host our application. So that was there. I think in last year around August or September, they have launched Mac on a cloud computing. And Now I'm talking about a security. Just guys, 1 minute. I'm just getting a call. Yeah, sorry. So I'm talking about a security groups. And just before I was talking about to communicate to any Linux server, the only way is SSH. And this is a TCP is a transaction control protocol. We will get to know while utilizing in a regular while using our regular terminologies HTTP. And if you see in our address bar, every browser or every website which will be accessed via HTTP. And whenever you are logging to any website or browsing through any information, so the calls will be through HTTP, hypertext transfer protocol. And this is the while communicating to the system to system, it is a TCP controls. And the port range is 2022. We can mention many other ports as well. Since I'm not installing any of the application and I don't want to utilize this particular server computer resources to install my customized application, then I'm simply proceeding with a port 22. So port 22 is a port for doing SSH. This is the basic things we should remember this. There are some ports that we should remember on every day, our day-to-day task. HTTP is a 80 and HTTPS is sorry 43 or 1 second 443. Yeah, HTTPS is a 443. And whatever the secure websites now I'm accessing, the lock symbol you can see, it is hosted on a 443. It is listening on our request onto this 443 server. Any application, even either it is a mobile application or a browser, while we are accessing GoToMeeting or a Facebook, so those are running or those are listening through 443 port. And some softwares like Tomcat, Apache Tomcat, the application servers will be listening on 8080 by default. And there are some other softwares like databases and Sonar. And every software should be listened on a particular port. Then only it will take a request and it will process the request and it will give back the result. Otherwise, if you don't enable this SSH, so we won't connect to this particular cloud machine and we don't get any information from this cloud machine. In the same way, if you want to install any of my customized application, imagine I'm just hosting my Facebook application or my company's website. I need to enable this HTTP and HTTPS ports. And inside my Tomcat server. I'm just hosting my application on 8080 port, and I'm routing my traffic via 443 HTTPS. So people used to communicate to my login or browse my company address with the help of my HTTP protocol or HTTPS protocol. I'm just typing https dot www.logic.com. So how it will act internally. So from a Chrome, whenever I'm requesting for facebook.com, which will be listened via HTTPS protocol, it will send first, it will send the request 443 port of Facebook server. It may be hosted in EC2 machine. It may be hosted in Facebook's their own data center. Okay, so that's where we are launching our EC2 compute engine to just host our applications instead of maintaining my own hardware. And from this 443, I might have deployed my server in Tomcat or WebLogic. There are other application servers and app servers, and there are other servers. So sometimes we used to directly connect to the web servers like Nginx. And behind here I have a imagine it is an a load balancer, or these are individual servers. One is a database and another one is EC2. This might be a T2 micro or some other machine which is listening on. I have hosted inside my Tomcat server 8080 port. In the same way, 8080 port load will be distributed with the load balancers. So these load balancers and all will be discussed while we are explaining about discussing about a cloud, how the traffic will be routed and everything. So when we just click on or looking browsing for a facebook.com which is running on a HTTPS protocol, the request will be redirected like this, and it will be redirected to the 443 server. Either it is an there is a server which accept all the incoming request for the Facebook, and from this 4.4 server the traffic will be routed to the respective compute engines. Imagine I have deployed this particular machine for login purpose, and this particular machine is for video streaming. We have a something video streaming like a YouTube shorts, and this is for different purpose in Facebook. So for every service I have a dedicated EC2 compute engines. So this is how when we are interacting with a browser or even any of the server or a website, So this is how it will redirect our request to get the request processed and get back the result. So back to launching to AWS EC2 machine. Now I'm talking about the ports, and you get to know, right? Now you have got a clear idea. So what is a port and why it has to be enabled? Since my Facebook is a web application, I'm enabling 443, 8080 and different ports. If it is communicating to any other databases or whatever the required ports, I need to enable. And this case, we don't need all 8080 or different ports. Rather, I'm just utilizing only 22 to just show you an example of how we can do the SSH to the target machine. And these
Rajendra,
networks and all. Yep.
hello. Rajendra, one quick question, like how to differentiate, like or how to identify which port number we need to enter there based upon their, like when to enter 8080, when to 443. Like as you said, we need
Yes.
to enter HTTP for see Apache to 443, these things. How to like exactly identify those things?
So typically for a HTTPS, 443 is a universal standard. This is not any customized for any organization. If you are utilizing or if you have installed your SSL certificates and your application has to be accessed from outside of the world or from any machine, you should enable this 443 port. This is a regular standard. This is not like we are choosing on demand. If you want your service to be up and running on a HTTPS, we should enable 443 port. Or if you don't want your application to be running on a HTTPS, I can simply go with 8080 or something. By default, HTTPS will run on 80.
Oh, okay, like my question is like when we use the HTTPS and when we use this Apache and when we use this 22, like right now
Yeah,
we are
that's what.
using okay,
Right now we are using only SSH port.
HS running. Okay,
SSH port. That means we are communicating to the EC2 machine only for the purpose of, because as you mentioned, when we are deciding which port we need to use, right? So other situations like in this situation, my purpose is only to connect to the EC2 machine, right? Are you
okay, yes,
installing any application or are you use deploying any application inside our newly created EC2 machine? We don't have any plans right
mm,
now.
yes, yes,
So our plan is to have just to connect to the target machine. So to
okay,
just connect, we just need a one port. What is that? For connecting to any Linux machine, the only way is SSH. So SSH, the default port is
okay,
2020, 22.
okay, okay, got it.
22 is a
So
default
like
port.
based on local machines, we need to change the port here.
Not exactly that, not a
Okay,
local machine. So the kind of the appliance for this EC2 machine. So you are buying a
okay,
washing machine or you are buying a mobile for your regular day-to-day calls, for your managing your multimedia, for your communication purpose, to use the social media and all. And do you buy a laptop for you for doing a calls, for attending the regular mobile calls and all? We cannot, right? So
yes,
based on a purpose. Now my
okay,
purpose is just to SSH to the target machine. That's why I'm
okay,
selecting this only this particular port. Tomorrow, whenever I'm giving a demo of installing Jenkins and installing Tomcat and deploying our application, I will be enabling the remaining ports one by one.
okay,
I may use
got it.
8080. I can configure my custom port as well. But these situations, SSH is a universal thing. We cannot configure the customized ports. By default, SSH means 2022.
Okay,
HTTP
got it.
means 443.
Four, four, three.
So HTTP means 80. These ports are And while I'm typing SSH port, I mentioned we should remember these basic port numbers: SSH 22, 8080, Apache 8080, and HTTPS will be running on 443,
443.
and different applications, DBs. My MongoDB will be running on different, and MySQL will be running on a different port. Based on application, every application should run on individual port numbers. So no other application will run on the same port. What exactly
Oh,
meant by that? Now
mm,
SSH is running on, listening on 22 port. We cannot enable this particular 22 port to any other application. Like I want to browse my server EC2 machine. I have installed my application there and I just want to utilize that application. You cannot simply browse with this particular port number. So since this port number is already assigned or allocated to SSH, so we need to
okay,
open another port number, which is 80 I'm choosing. And you can choose 12 for hosting your web application. You can choose some random port number. All
okay,
you need to configure your application. Application has to be configured while deploying. My case, let's say once after 2 days or 3 days, deploy I'm going to install Apache Tomcat. Inside Apache Tomcat, I want to host my hello world application or any welcome web page of my company. In that case, I have to configure a custom port number. If at all I don't want to use this default 8080 port, and I don't want to
okay,
use this default 80 port, I will go with any custom port. But
okay.
SSH is a system already installed one. This will be always
With the
running with the
default
22
22.
port.
Yeah,
Yeah.
got it. Yeah, thank
So
you.
these ports, just remember, these ports are mandatory to remember every time in our day-to-day life. If you go to any interview or any our regular task and doing SSH, we used to do SSH very often, very often. One
Okay,
second. So let me launch the machine. And I'm just explaining about other details of EC2, the network and the number of instances I'm launching. Now I'm launching only one machine, and network by default it will create under an VPC. I have chosen a default VPC. I haven't configured any VPC as of now. So nothing major information that we need to take care of for now. And storage, if you see, I'm attaching a root volume in this particular location of my machine, dev/sda. Whenever we are launching a compute engine, like we purchase a new machine with a 500 TB HDD, 500 gigs of HDD, or a 512 GB of SSD storage. So likewise, 8 GB of a storage I am taking for this particular Ubuntu EC2 machine. So volume types and all will be explained later, but we just need to take care of this. What is a snapshot and what is a root and where it is getting mounted. What exactly here mount means? Like I said, when we are running out of memory in your laptop and we used to connect our external hard disk, or we used to connect our pen drives. When you connect your pen drive on a Windows machine, you can see there I drive or E drive. It will assign a random name, the device name, and in Windows it will be drives: I drive, E drive, C drive. And when it comes to the Linux, yesterday I have shown you one picture about a file system. So in a file system, this particular thing, any volume, any mount, imagine my EC2 compute engine is running with a 20 GB or 30 GB of data by default, and my application is utilizing more and more. I have installed a database or something. I have installed deployed a static website, and I'm getting keep on documents from the website, many clients are uploading their documents and my storage is getting full. In that situation, I need to increase my volume. So the volumes, whatever I'm going to mount, the terminology mounting will be, very frequent, not a very frequent. We used to get habituated with whenever we want to increase our volume or assign our new volume to the existing system. Like we used to insert our pen drives, our external hard disks into the system to expand our memory. So the mounting point is dev. In a Linux root file directory location, root directory, we have our dev folder. So any new volume we are going to mount, it will be under this dev. And if you see dev slash sda1, sda1, these are all folders. If you see any of this particular folder, this is a folder in a file system of an EC2 machine, of and my local virtual machine, of my computer. If you take any example, our Android device or mobiles or IoT devices and the laptops, so everything is in the form of a folders. It will be stored inside our hard disk or SSDs. And I'm proceeding further. So the tags is nothing but if you want to name this particular EC2 machine, like if you want to remember this machine as a database, or if you want to remember this machine as a UI or a login service, you can name here to identify in a future. Since the companies, they used to maintain the tags because they are running a thousands of virtual EC2 machines on their infrastructure. They used to segregate with these particular tags. At any point of a time, they want to list out all the EC2 machines which are there in developer environment, or which are there in a QA environment or in a production environment. They can tag, they can list out easily with the tags. So we can give any number of tags, and I'm reviewing and proceeding further to launch. The next phase is existing key pair or create a new key pair. So when we are talking about AWS, it will rely on a very a secured way of a communication. Whether we need to create a new key pair to communicate to the target newly created machine, this particular EC2 machine, we need a credentials, right? This is a one way of authenticating to the EC2 machine. I'm choosing an existing key pair since I have already one key pair, Rajendra, and I'm acknowledging and I'm launching now. If you don't want to, use your existing keys and some other purpose you are practicing, and you can create anytime the new key pair, and you just need to give your name and download your key pair. With this downloaded key pair, if anybody can access, if they have this particular um, PIM file, I have a PIM file downloaded to my local. So rajendra.pim, which I have already in my machine. So by this, I'm authenticating to the cloud machine. Let me check the status of the instance state is running, and the status check is initializing. Instance type is a T2 micro. Now it has created an instance ID. And about the default information about newly running compute engine, we can check here, initializing, and where it is hosted. Since we are in a Mumbai zone, we can select any of the zone. You might be having a question why these many regions and availability zones. As I mentioned, so imagine I'm launching a new website for a e-commerce purpose. and I sell only South Indian food or North Indian food. That is an food serving application. I serve only North Indian based food, and we can easily assess our client base. Yeah, we get our clients mostly from Northeast or directly from the North. So based on that, I will be hosting my application in Mumbai zone. And imagine you are designing an application for European countries. So mostly your application will be accessed by the European countries or European clients. In that case, you need to select the respective availability zone and a region. So Frankfurt, I'm selecting mostly my if my application is running on Germany or the nearby areas the people used to. If we host our application in India and most of the our clients or major users are from different country, so the latency and the slowness you will be experienced. Based on that, people used to decide the regions and availability zones where we need to host our application, where what is the client base, and when the situation comes, our same application will be running on multiple regions, India, Europe, and America. So when we are running our application on a multiple countries, we have to depend on multiple availability zones and multiple regions. So we have to deploy our application in multiple regions, the same application. So that will be discussed later. So I'm just giving you an overview of that. So now I have created a EC2 instance. As I mentioned, now I'm going to SSH to this particular machine. I'm just coming back to the EC2 dashboard. If you have accounts ready, you just try these things in your EC2 compute engine, and don't forget to kill your or terminate your instance. Once your practice is over, just terminate the instance. Otherwise, it will charge you more. Not a more. It is a limited only since it is a T2 micro. And moreover, for a new account, they will give a 750 or 720 hours of free computing minutes. That means now I have spinned up my EC2 machine. It will start counting from that particular fraction of a second. And now throughout this session, let's say I've used it for 1 hour. So from 730 or 750 hours, it will reduce to 749 hours. It's a pro rata base. And if I'm running 10 EC2 compute engines at a time and for an 1 hour, that means 10 into 1. So 10 hours of your free time will be utilized. So if you're creating a new account, no worries. I think it will last for until you finish your training and your regular day-to-day practices. Everything we can achieve with the one free account. And all you need, whenever you finish your training, whenever you finish your practicing purpose, just try to terminate the instance. We have a mobile application as well, Android application, AWS console. So directly we can search in Google Play or Apple Play Store. So it will be handy if you forgot to terminate your instance and you just gone out, and you can directly terminate from the mobile app itself. So please be handy if you think you will be forgotten very often. And now I'm connecting to this machine, compute engine. We have a public IP here. With the public IP or with the instance ID also, I can connect. Now I'm running, mostly we use the IP addresses and the host names to connect to the target machines. And if you see this public IPv4 DNS, sorry, we cannot connect with this instance ID via SSH. This instance ID will be used for internal communication. We can log into this particular EC2 server only with either DNS or either public IP address. In the same way, we have a private DNS and a private IP address. What exactly this? Why system is having a two IP addresses? Because we don't expose in general. Let me just explain you about how companies used to maintain their infrastructure. Mm, yeah, I think that better we will discuss that later session. Now I will just show you about doing SSH. What is a private and public IP addresses? Uh, In a previous session, it was recorded by Bharat. You can just go through the videos. So I'm taking in a private public IP since I'm connecting from my machine is hosted on a Mumbai zone, AP South 1B, and now I'm accessing from a Hyderabad from my local machine. Before that, let me show you where I am. I'm in my user space, user home directory. Imagine you are there in somewhere in a downloads or something in a documents. What happened? So now I'm in somewhere in desktop screenshot folder. I just want to go to my user home. From anywhere, you can give just a CD, enter. It will go to your user space or user home directory. If you're not sure where exactly you are in, you want to redirect to your user space, you can just use a CD, or if you want to go to this particular location, tilde slash is something our user home. From the user space, I have a downloads folder. I want to go to there. And now you can see many files in my downloads folder, and I'm just looking out for printing my present working directory. You can clearly see users slash r Nelakurti and then followed by downloads. And instead of using this particular command, I have used somewhere from the desktop to go to this particular downloads folder. I have used tilde slash slash followed by downloads folder. So we can use the same. These are absolute path and relative paths, we can say. Now I'm in a desktop and I just want to redirect to the downloads folder. I can give absolute path because I know where my download folder is available. In my user workspace, user home, there will be a download folder, there will be a desktop folder, there will be a documents folder like we have in Windows machine. In your user, when you log in, you can see there in the left side of a favorites, downloads, documents, and my computer, everything will be there, C drive. So likewise, we should know where we are in our Linux file system. This is very a basic thing that we should be habituated when something, let's say imagine in this particular EC2 machine, I have installed my front-end application and that is not working fine. Installed my application in the sense I have deployed my application inside any of web server like Nginx or some other server I have installed. Inside that server I have deployed my code and my code is running fine as of now, and just a fraction of seconds before it was stopped because of server got stopped, and you need to troubleshoot it, and you should know where exactly your application is running, like user whether it is installed on the application server or web server installed in your opt directory, either it is in a opt directory or either it is in a temp directory. Now we can see in a root file system there is a folder temp. So likewise we have many folders, and we should know where our application is installed and application is deployed. The basic things when we are entering into any organization, or we should know our infrastructure, what kind of servers we have, where we are hosting our applications, either on EC2 compute engines or either inside your Docker. We are installing Docker inside your EC2 compute engines and deploying your application there. So, and I'm just coming back to the SSH. So I think you're clear about this redirecting to downloads to desktop to somewhere in OPT folder, from somewhere in users folder. So we should know, we should be aware of our file system, the root file system. I have executed ls-lrt to list out what is there in my root file system. The file system will be started with the root slash. Inside a slash we have a course, we have a var, user, temp, has been, private, and if you see users, here is my user was created and my user workspace is there at slash user followed by rn. I'm just typing tab. If there is a folder, then only it will give the result. If there is no user or a folder inside this users, it won't give any result. Like I just typed a pr, nothing is there. So now I'm in my user workspace. I have listed down. These are my applications inside my user workspace. And there is my key, rajendra.pem. Now I'm connecting to my EC2 machine with the help of my PEM key. So let me try without a PEM key first. And if you're not aware of how to connect, how to do SSH, it will give you the prompting here. You need to select EC2 machine and there is a connection option, connect. And you can see the instance ID connect. If you are using a secure shell from here, it will utilize this instance ID. Now I'm going with the public IP, because I'm using a MacBook and I have a terminal. I can directly connect. If you're using a Windows based machine, we can use the PuTTY. And there is another utility, MOBA XTERM. People mostly use this because we can maintain a multiple sessions in a MOBA XTERM. If you see here, factory servers, Linux servers, where they can group your servers. Imagine factory servers, I have around 20 to 30 EC machines. I can group them And the Linux servers, I have around 50 to 100. I can group them. I can open multiple tabs over there in MobiXterm. For Putty, it will be a single application. If you see here the image, this is a single application where you need to provide your target IP address and the port number for Windows based apps. And if you install Git Bash, you will get to know that when we are discussing about Git session once the Linux is over. And the default credential. And if you see .ssh, we are selecting the SSH to communicate or to connect to the target machine. Now from my terminal, let me clear it out. SSH, I'm just going back to my EC2 instance. We have a user Ubuntu and the IP address is this one. Let me connect via SSH client. In my terminal, I have SSH client. By default, any Linux based operating system will be having a default SSH client like MacBook, like Ubuntu, like RHEL, some other DOS based operating systems. And they have given you an example of how we can utilize the command as well. SSH-i PEM key followed by user. Now see how we are doing SSH followed by the authentication mechanism is a PEM and a Ubuntu is my username. SSH basic syntax is something user @ IP address or host name. So whenever you're planning to or you're trying to connect to a target machine, this is a basic syntax. I'm giving a PIM key here. This is optional for SSH for our on-premise infrastructure. Since I'm maintaining my infrastructure in a cloud and I don't want to use my password and I just want to authenticate with a PIM key. So here, when you give your username @ IP address, I'm connecting to this particular target machine with this username. I'm trying to say to the shell, my bash shell with SSH command, hey SSH, I just want to connect to this particular IP with this particular username. And let me just use this command. And as you mentioned, we can connect with the DNS name as well as with IP address. I will show you both. Now I have copied and pasted it here. SSH followed by user and followed by IP address or domain name. After giving this particular command, I'm able to log in without providing my username and password because I have a PIM key which is there in my local user home. Did you find out any difference here? Now when I give pwd, it is showing out home Ubuntu. Now I have logged in, or I have SSH'd to the target EC2 T2 micro instance. So I have logged into this particular EC2 machine. Now currently I am inside this particular. Yeah, please.
But the root directory it is showing as home, but when we created EC2 instance, it has shown dev root, right? Slash dev.
No, actually, that was not a root. I have mentioned that that is an external storage we are mounting to dev
Okay.
slash SDA. That means whenever we are installing our operating system, we are installing operating system into our C drive in our Windows based machines. We can find out 1 second. So this is a dev folder. We need to switch to the user. So the storage which I was mentioned earlier, that is hardware storage. I mean, uh, I'm spinning up a new virtual machine. I need a storage of a 8 GB of a physical storage. That's where I have mounted my external storage, not mine. AWS external storage I have mounted to this particular EC2 instance. That doesn't mean
Okay.
that my user workspace should be on a slash dev SDA1. So that is just a storage
Okay.
I'm mounting to the my file system. My file system in the sense a root location. So this
Okay.
EC2 instance, whenever we are creating, it will install an operating system inside my file system. What is my file system? Slash. In slash, I have a storage of 8 gigs of storage, which I have mounted inside my dev. But the mounting will happen inside a dev in a root level. And you can see the root user directly here, and home folder. But in my MacBook, I don't have a home. So instead of a home, I'm in a users folder, user and my username. So it will be vary from distribution to distribution. But most of the situations for Linux based or Ubuntu based, the folder structure will be like this. Inside our home, the users will be created. It will be maybe in the next session, whenever we are creating multiple users, by default where it will create a workspace and all, we can see that multiple. Now in this case I'm using Ubuntu. Now I'm switching. So somewhere I have utilized the sudo hyphen su switch user. As of now, I'm in Ubuntu user space, and I have given a CD. I have mentioned that wherever you are in, if you enter CD and enter, you will be moved to your user home folder. Now I'm printing my user home.
I'm in a root folder now. The root directory is different and root is different. Root is a user, a super user like we have in Windows. When if you remember you are using a company laptop, whenever you're trying to install any software, you will be asked to enter administrative username and a password. So that is a root user in a Linux. And we can make our regular Ubuntu user also root user by adding this root user into the high privileged user groups, and we need to make this particular Ubuntu as a root user. That is a possible, but in a default case, root is highest privileged user. He can do anything in our Linux machine. And from our existing user, in Windows, if you want to switch to the new user, you need to log out and you need to log in to the machine. And for Linux, it is a different. So on a same session, you can switch to the different user. Now I have switched sudo. I have used sudo -su. Sudo is a something. If you want to use a normal user, he has to utilize the highest privileged power. The command is a sudo. It will be discussed in the next commands which we have, but the basic overview. If you want to use your sudo powers or sudo command powers with a normal user, we need to use a sudo ls we can use, or sudo cd we can use. That means I don't have a permission. Exit. Now I have exited from the root user. Now you can see here Ubuntu. Now once I exited from this particular root user, I have come back to the Ubuntu user. If you see, I have mentioned that Ubuntu is a normal user. He doesn't have any power, and he just want to look the content inside my root folder /root. Root is a super user. He has all the privileges, and he's unable to look even traveling to this particular directory. He don't have a permissions, and in this situation, I can go with sudo /root sudo ls/root. Now we can see a folder with the name snap is available. Earlier it was showing a permission denied, and now I'm able to see with a sudo command. Sudo is the highest escalation or giving a power to the normal user to utilize super user commands. In this situation, root commands, whatever the root commands and the file permission, the locations where I don't have a permissions, I can directly access with the sudo command. Or rather, I can directly switch to the root user. Now I have switched to the root user. You might be wonder, you haven't entered any username here. How by default it is going to root? Yes, whenever we are giving sudo -su, whatever the user, either Ubuntu or either Rajendra or a different user, Samax user, if you give sudo -su, by default, it will try to switch to the root user. And you don't want to switch to the root user by default, you can directly use sudo -su and specify the username. And now I'm in a root, and I just want to go back to the Ubuntu. Now you can see from the root user, I have switched to the Ubuntu.
Rajendra, but we
Yep,
haven't even entered the password. How it is possible to enter directly to the admin rights without entering the password? Like,
that's what. So
okay,
Ubuntu is a default user. By default, whenever we are connecting to the EC2 machine,
okay,
if you see this, SSH client is trying to connect with the Ubuntu user by authenticating my PEM key. So I have connected to this particular target machine now. Then I'm trying to switch from Ubuntu to my root user. That means this is just a normal user. Ubuntu is a normal user. I want to switch to the new user. If you remember an above command su root, or I can directly give switch user. By default, it will ask a password. Okay, I should have a permission to directly switch to the another user. Since I don't have any password, since we are authenticating with a PEM file, I don't have password. I'm just using Control C. In terminal, anytime if you're encountered, if your terminal is waiting for your input and you don't have any input and you want to cancel it, you can directly use a Control C. You'll be come out of that. That's where I'm using my highest escalated privileges to switch my user to the root user. And you cannot directly switch. Let's say I have created a new user. Tomorrow I will be creating a new user. From the new user, I cannot directly switch with this command sudo -su. It won't switch to the root user. Why? Because this particular Ubuntu user has added into the different groups. The groups is having the privileges. Whenever you are using sudo command, this user will get highest privileges to switch to root user. And in the same way, any new user which we are creating, if you want to get the same permissions, you need to add the particular user into those groups. So this case,
Got it. Yeah.
you got it right. And you will be experienced very well when we are creating a new users and when we are switching between user to user. Okay. And this case now, and even if you see now I'm in a root user, who am I? Anytime if you want to see who you are, by which user you are doing all this operation, you can give who am I, and who gives the timing and everything, Ubuntu and the timings. And now I'm a root user and I want to switch to the Ubuntu user. Su Ubuntu. Earlier I have mentioned only sudo -su because I'm in a different user, Ubuntu or Rajendra, some or Ritvik. So I'm in a Rajendra user and I want to switch to the root user, and I don't need to give the root. Directly I can give sudo -su su. It will directly switch to the new user, root user. In this situation, I'm in already in a root and I want to be root is a default case for any other user. From any other user, if you want to switch to the root, you don't need to mention a root. But for other users, like I'm in a root and I want to switch to the Ubuntu and I want to switch to some other user, I need to mention that because this is a different user as you Ubuntu and it is not asking any password. Yeah, by default, root user can switch to any of the users. Since he's a highest privileged user, he don't need any password and he can delete your user workspace as well. He can do anything in a machine. And the Linux basic commands and all we will discuss in a tomorrow session. So I think the time is up, almost 10:15. And yeah, now we'll take another 5 minutes. If you have any doubts so far in the session, we'll discuss now.
Rajendra, usually when we use is when we try to connect through PuTTY, we will enter
Okay.
the this PEM key directly. We will insert those PEM key into the PuTTY, right? So
Yes.
here, when we connect through SSH, it is directly compiling the PEM key from local. So is
Yes.
there any target locations like as soon as we download this, it will directly download to the local. What if we change the location, target location from local to any other
Yeah.
directory?
Yes.
Will it directly capture those
No.
PEM key
No, it
or
won't capture. It
okay,
won't capture. So that's where they have
okay,
mentioned -I. I'm enforcing or I'm just giving you an giving an input with my location. Example, in my user home, I have a desktop folder.
Okay.
Inside my desktop, I have a PEM folder. And from the downloads, I have copied my PEM key to this PEM folder, like AWS underscore temp folder. I have copied rajendra.pem. So I need to provide absolute path. This is an absolute path.
Okay.
Okay, I need to provide absolute path to do SSH Ubuntu @ IP address, domain name, DNS name. Okay,
Okay.
got you.
Yeah.
Okay. So any other doubts?
Sudo is to connect to our VM from our local putty.
Not from the local. So this is something we are switching between a users and a target machine. Imagine you have logged into your Ubuntu machine or EC2 compute engine with a default username as a Ubuntu. And
Okay.
if you see, if you're launching Red Hat or CentOS or any other machine, the username is a different. Like EC2-user is a user we are logging in. For Red
Okay.
Hat based machines, for Ubuntu, this is a default user. And this default user doesn't have any permissions to install a software, to manage our processes inside the compute engine, to install any software, to deploy my application. He doesn't have any permissions. He's just a user to simply connect to your target machine. From there, you are switching to the super user to utilize or to install, to manipulate or to configure your EC2 instance for further utilization. Like you want to install Apache Tomcat, you want to deploy your application, you want to install a Docker there, you want to install Ansible there. So Ubuntu user
So
doesn't have a privileges to do that. That's where you are using sudo su to switch your user to the root user. Yeah, please.
after sudo, so we have to give name, right?
We don't need to, because
Okay.
now this case I'm switching to root. By default, if you don't give a name, it will try to connect to the root user. As I mentioned, it will connect to the root user by default. It will try to connect. And if this particular Ubuntu user doesn't have a permission to switch to this particular root user, it will ask the password. And rather, imagine you have a Jenkins service which is installed in your EC2 machine, which we have launched just now. And the Jenkins service is running under Jenkins user. And any modification has to be done to that particular Jenkins service. You should be you should be switched to the Jenkins user from Ubuntu user sudo su hyphen Jenkins. I need to provide the Jenkins username and I will be switched to the Jenkins user. Okay. From once I switch to the Jenkins user, I have a privileges to stop the Jenkins service or to edit the Jenkins related configuration. That is how it works. In general, we don't directly switch to the root user. I've given you an example here how when we apply sudo-su to which user it will connect. But since we have only root user and Ubuntu user, I have given you the example of only two users. And tomorrow, whenever we are creating a multiple users and we are providing them as a root privileges, we will be switching from Ubuntu to different user, Rajendra, Ubuntu to Jenkins or Jenkins to some other user. We will be having a multiple users in a real time. So is it answered your question?
Yeah.
Yeah. So any doubts anybody's having? And if you don't understand what exactly we have no, we had this session. Even that silly question is fine, because all we need, you should be aware what we are discussing. Since many of you guys from non-IT as well, you can ask any questions, and do not
Uh,
hesitate, because it will stop you in learning.
okay.
Yeah, please.
Rajendra, can you tell me the command for to switch from user to local? For example, right now I am in user directory. I would like to change my directory to home.
User to home in the sense, see, I'm in users, my user home,
Yes.
in my
For
user,
example,
in my
okay.
user home.
User to
Yeah.
local. User to local. If I want to switch to user to local, normally
You're talking,
when we
okay, you're talking about once you have connected to the EC2 compute engine.
yes.
No, you cannot connect, because you have already connected from your local to a target remote machine. Now you are in remote machine. See, I just
Okay.
exited from the remote machine. And if you see anytime, this is my target machine, EC2 machine. And currently
Okay.
I'm in host name. Currently I'm in my local machine. And even if I'm there, now I logged into the remote machine, I cannot connect back, or I cannot switch to my local. The only thing, I need to disconnect the connection. This SSH connection has to be disconnected to come back to my local.
Okay.
Are you getting my point? So it is
Yes.
not a
Yes.
vice versa. So if you're trying to connect your machine from the EC2 machine, let's say imagine you have a SSH server installed in your local laptop, and because you don't have any public IP, your laptop is having ipconfig. Let me exit out. If config, I'm running on my 127.0.0.1. This is not a public IP. If you see in your local machine, if you execute this if config, you will see the same IP address. Since I'm connected to my router, and router, any request from my local computer, it will redirect via router. Router, from the router, it will go to the internet service provider. Service provider will assign a static IP. From there, it will try to connect to the EC2 machine. But you're talking about,
Okay.
we want to connect from EC2 machine to your local machine. Since you don't
Okay.
have a static IP, you cannot connect directly from the remote server to your local machine.
Okay. So we cannot even extract any files from local if we want to, even after entering the certain path.
Exactly, exactly. So if you want
Okay.
to extract any file from your local, there is a command. You need to copy to the target folder. Copy source
Okay.
folder and the target IP address. Ubuntu at the rate the IP address followed by /home /ubuntu home directory. And this CP and SCP will be discussed in a later session. So how
Okay.
you want to copy your local content to the remote server, and you want to extract there, and those things will be, we will discuss further.
Okay. Yeah,
Okay.
okay. Yes.
So that's what. So you cannot come back unless you disconnect your current session, SSH session.
Okay.
So any doubts?
No, from my end.
Okay, Satish and Ritvik, Renuka, Panduranga. Okay then.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
So I'm stopping the record now.